Hello and welcome to the Manchester is Red podcast. My name is Steven Railston. We're recording this episode on a Monday morning and I'm joined as usual by Samuel Luckhurst. Samuel, we'll jump straight into it because we've got the big news of Dan Ashworth's departure. That was confirmed on Sunday morning. In the second part, we'll look back on the Nottingham Forest game and dissect that. But as I say, we'll start with Dan Ashworth because it's the big story. That was a big shock for me. I was working yesterday morning, that came through. You obviously had a day off, but still contributed with quite a few bits. What was your reaction, Samuel? Because I didn't see it coming.
No, it was certainly a shock. Coincidentally, Dan Ashworth strolled through the press conference room on Saturday evening about 20 minutes after full time, half an hour, and he was escorted through by Colette Roach, the chief operating officer, and he looked pretty grim-faced. There was a security official stood behind him, and it's not unusual to see Colette Roach walk through the press conference room after a match. She's done that a few times. It's quite labyrinthine, the corridors of Old Trafford, and if you're heading in that direction through the press conference room, it's to access the corridors to get round to the East Stand where the main offices are. And in retrospect, Ashworth was being frog marched, if you like, to possibly the boardroom where they ratified his departure from the club, his sacking. I mean, it is effectively a sacking. I know that United have tried to dilute the impact of it, but from what I've been told, things hadn't been rosy there for a few weeks. He was not in favour of Ruben Amorim's appointment. He was pushing for Gareth Southgate. And when you consider that, the timelines kind of tally with him leaving the club. And it's not a good look for him. It's not a good look for Ineos. Ineos spent longer courting Ashworth than Ashworth actually spent at United. Okay, it was a meagre fee that they eventually paid Newcastle for him, something like between £2 million and £3 million. But every penny does count at the moment when supporters are starting to foot the bill with ticket prices being hiked to £66. Ratcliffe said in February to us that Ashworth is a world-class sporting director. Ashworth clearly was familiar to Dave Brailsford. They knew each other before they started working together at United. So they wanted best in class. They wanted their first choice. They got their first choice. But all of a sudden, things have disintegrated quite rapidly, and it's been extremely turbulent 5 months for United since Ashworth started. Not only because of him, of course. I mean, there's been so much that's happened during that time. They've sacked a manager. They've incurred some dreadful results. They've spent a lot of money on players coming in. They've got a few million on players going out. Some of them have, obviously supporters not entirely happy with some of the players who have left, but I think that's been a relatively moot point. Ultimately, it comes down to the choice of coach and the politics at play. And I always found it quite intriguing when we spoke to Ashworth and Omar Barada on September the 1st, I think it was, just a few hours before United played Liverpool at home. We were in the boardroom with them. And both of them were very keen to make it clear that they started work in July. Ashworth was July the 1st, Barada was July the 13th. And at the time I thought, well, this is quite a good, convenient way to wash their hands of any decision that was taken with Eric Ten Hag's future in the summer, because part of the reason why Ten Hag stayed was because there was a leadership vacuum at the club. Ratcliffe didn't want to be the one taking the decision because he clearly feels as though there are people below him who are at the coalface who he would like to delegate to make that decision. It would have been a bad look had a cycling guru taken that decision to Dave Brailsford. So he didn't make that decision. So who else was it going to be? Was it going to be Josh Thompson, who just seems to linger around Carrington with a questionable existence? It wasn't going to be him making that decision either. He's another one of the another member of the Ineos cabal. So that's why Ten Hag stayed. But clearly, and you saw it last night from the numerous pieces that were done, that people at Ineos have certainly been trying to get their ducks lined up, and they've gone into bat for Ratcliffe, stressing how unimpressed he was by some of the answers that came out of our Q&A with Barada and Ashworth in September. And the irony of that is that Ratcliffe has avoided talking to the dedicated correspondence by and large. I spoke to him in Knightsbridge in February because the MEN was quite rightly invited down to that briefing, but the majority of the journalists there were not Manchester United correspondents. They were chief sports writers or some writers who have had dialogue with Ineos for quite a long time, or the sports news reporters, for example. I think there must have been about a dozen of us there, but certainly I was the only one who you would look at and say, well, he's a dedicated Man United writer. The only other one I can think of would be Jeremy Cross of the Daily Star, who of course is their chief sports writer anyway, but he did work on the United patch. Yet of all the questions Ratcliffe has fielded, or Ratcliffe's underlings have fielded, it's been questions asked by the dedicated correspondents that appear to have piqued him, and those questions were the ones asked of Barada and Ashworth, and apparently their answers about, well, we started in July, so it wasn't our decision. And you had to take that with a pinch of salt, because Barada was clearly working for United while he was on gardening leave, because two of his former colleagues at Manchester City rocked up at United in Jason Wilcox as technical director. He, of course, used to be the academy head at City. Toby Craig, chief communications officer as well. He also used to work at City, and from what I've been told, he was pretty tight with Barada as well when they worked over at Eastlands. So when they say that, you think, okay, you technically did start in July, but while you were in your garden tending to your roses or mowing the lawn or what have you, there's no way you weren't dialing into the back channels or using a burner phone to speak to the people who were running Manchester United at the time, because it was pretty clear that Ashworth was eventually, by hook or by crook, going to end up working at United. And I do think he's become a fall guy, because I don't think you can pin too much of the recruitment on him. If he's coming in July and that's his official start date, targets have got to be lined up long before then. Now, maybe he was really, really thoroughly involved in that in the background, but I think he'd have had to have kept his distance for legal reasons over some processes. But he did tell us in September, he said, I like the squad. And
he's got to say that, doesn't he, Samuel? Kind of, when he's a few months into the job, he can't really come out and really criticise them, can he? It's not a good look.
No, and to be honest, I thought at the end of it, if you were looking at it through an ultra optimistic prism, and you were an employee and they'd got all their targets per position, the priority positions anyway, then you could look at it and think, well, yeah, it looks pretty decent. It's not perfect, but it feels progressive. But it always came back to the issue of the manager and them just losing their nerve to sack him in the summer. And it's not a coincidence that United are currently in their lowest position after 15 league games since 1986 to 87. And the common denominator of those two seasons is the manager was sacked in the spring, and quite rightly as well. But in the case of Ten Hag, he should have been sacked. He should have been sacked in the summer. But the people at United acted like a lot of United fans and kept him just on the evidence of 90 minutes, when there were 38 Premier League games, 6 Champions League games. That's 44 matches. I think that's more compelling evidence to judge a manager on, rather than just an FA Cup final, which they were brilliant in. Nobody disputes that. It was a wonderful day. We praised them all to high heaven on the day. We praised them all to high heaven after the game. But that was an anomaly. And it's no way to run a football club if you're just judging a manager on the back of one cup final. And Vicente Del Bosque was sacked by Real Madrid in 2003 after he won the La Liga title. And this was a guy who had also won the Champions League the previous season, and had won the Champions League while he was the caretaker there in 2000. So that decision just played them into trouble from the off. And in the end, Ashworth is the fall guy. The amount of times we've heard from people at United how they do their due diligence on people, and they're really thorough and very fastidious in terms of getting to know the people who are going to come in or what their personality is like, etc. If they really did their due diligence on Ashworth, they would not have hired him. And I know it's easy to say they wouldn't have. They couldn't possibly have foreseen these circumstances. Well, you could, because you've always got to be prepared to sack a manager. You've always got to have a contingency plan. If you haven't got a contingency plan, or if you're not prepared for that eventuality, you're not doing your job. And the man who said this, and he said it on a podcast as well, so you can hear him say it, was Dan Ashworth a couple of years ago when he gave a podcast to the Express and Star. So that was always going to be a big problem. The fact that Ashworth wasn't in favour of Amrim, from what I was told, he believes that Amrim is too hands-on, which is kind of ironic because you'd think that Ineos, having given him the head coach title rather than the manager title, they don't want him to be hands-on. They want him to be the head coach, and they want recruitment to be overseen by whoever that may be now. But certainly when I wrote at the time that Amrim had agreed in principle to take over at United, I was told that Barada was convincing him to go to United rather than wait on the off chance that City could that Pep Guardiola could leave City in the summer and that he could take over there. It didn't really occur to me at the time that is this a bit odd that it's the chief executive driving this rather than the sporting director? Shouldn't it be the sporting director who's overseeing the decision making process or this specific process? John Murtagh picked Erik ten Hag back in April 2022 when the dressing room's preferred pick was Mauricio Pochettino. Obviously, before then, it was Ed Woodward who was the kingmaker. In a strange way, United have regressed or reverted to that way of operating where the chief executive is the kingmaker. Barada was the big driver behind hiring Amrim. I don't blame United for going for Amrim over Gareth Southgate. I'm sure the vast majority of Manchester United supporters probably breathed a huge sigh of relief when they discovered that Southgate was Ashworth's choice, but United opted for Amrim. But ultimately, it is still a horrendous look for Ineos that this guy that they really fought tooth and nail for longer than he was actually at the club has left after 5 months and 6 days.
That's why it's so incredible, isn't it? To push so hard. It was such a song and dance, wasn't it, at the start of the year? There was a soap opera of Newcastle negotiations for Ashworth. And then to push, he was on gardening leave for 4 months, and for him to leave after 5 months. It just does not look good. I mean, Sir Jim Ratcliffe kind of came with the promise that the chaos at the club would end, but it's just continued, hasn't it, Samuel? I mean, we're 10 months into his kind of co-ownership, and it's just still an absolute mess, unfortunately.
Yeah, it's an omnishambles. It's difficult to pinpoint where to start there, and Amrim has got a hospital pass, really, in that you look at that team and it's not that their position in the table is not an unfair reflection. It is tight, of course, between the teams points wise, but and yes, you've got Newcastle and Tottenham just above them. You've got Newcastle, Spurs, and United in 11th, 12th, 13th, which is pretty. I think it's Cy Bajkowski, our colleague, said yesterday, it's quite mind blowing given the quality in those squads. But United, the quality is really quite suspect. And I could look. I'm not a football administrator. I'm not a head coach. But in the summer, could I see this coming? Yeah. Could others see it coming? Absolutely. Could some fans see it coming as well? Of course they could. And United have frittered millions.
Do you think that's been the main reason in the breakdown of relationships then, Samuel, the Erik ten Hag decision? Because it was obviously hugely contentious in the summer. We both give our opinions on it. And as you've just said, thought it was obviously the right reason to get rid of him. But the decision was made before Ashworth started work, wasn't it? He started work on July the 1st. And it was announced that he would remain in charge in June.
I just think it's buck passing from Ratcliffe, and there was a lot of buck passing in his interview with United We Stand last week as well, when he was complaining about the data and how it stuck in the previous century. That there are people who worked at United and there are people who work at United who could tell him that he is factually wrong on that. I mean, I went back and looked at a quote speaking to Nick Cox about the process they went through to recruit Alejandro Garnacho in 2020. Now, that process they went through was data driven. It was a model they used pre-Brexit as well, bearing that in mind, and it whittled down to 5 names, and Garnacho was one of the 5. Scouted 5 players. They decided go with Garnacho. They signed Garnacho. That is not a way of recruitment that is stuck in the 20th century whatsoever. And John Murtagh did do some good work as well in terms of recruitment, trying to make it a more sophisticated setup. There were. I'm not defending United's recruitment whatsoever. I mean, people can see what I've written and said about United's recruitment in the past, and it is still diabolically poor under the current regime, which Murtagh has nothing to do with. And Murtagh, of course, allowed Ten Hag to have far too much sway. But it was around about 2 years ago, less than 2 years ago, that there were a lot of pieces being written about how United were. The setup at United was a lot more sophisticated. They were more modern in their thinking. It was a better run football club. Richard Arnold was a better chief executive than Ed Woodward. He was not as hands-on. They had a football director who'd got his feet under the table and was quietly doing some pretty decent work. And those pieces were written, and United were winning quite consistently, and they were having a good season. But you are always as good as your results. And of course, results deteriorated last season. And the three main men at that point, Arnold, Murtagh, Ten Hag, all of them are no longer at the club, and there are several reasons why those figures are no longer employees of Manchester United. There's only so much you can go on about harking about the past and what the previous regime did. Ratcliffe has, that Ineos delegation went to Old Trafford during the strategic review in March 2023, so they had a good look around, and there were people at United who tried to give the illusion that Ineos were really impressed, when I don't think they were whatsoever. And fair enough, United have got a lot of catching up to do still, and at that time had a lot of catching up to do as well. It was not being operated anywhere near well enough after Sir Alex Ferguson retired. They were completely exposed, and then they were very dilatory, and they were always behind the curve, and they still are behind the curve. And okay, it is going to take time. You bear that in mind. But this regime decided to let a manager stay who really should have been sacked. I said it in April. I'll say it again. And I know a lot of fans out there were swayed by one match in an FA Cup final and thought he's got to stay. But fans are not objective. And objectively, he should have been sacked. And I know I was right at the time, and I've been proven right because he was sacked in October. And I know you said that he should have been sacked as well. And a lot of colleagues felt he should have been sacked. Some didn't think he should have been.
It's always big, isn't it, Samuel, when the local paper says that? But there was a reason we were saying that at the time. He needed to go in the summer.
Everyone is entitled to their opinion. Everyone is entitled to change their mind. That is absolutely fine. But I was looking at it objectively. You could not keep a manager who they were trying to replace, actively trying to replace. And Ten Hag, that interview he gave to the Dutch newspaper in July, that laid bare a lot of the problems as well. You knew then that it was still simmering, because he said how communication stopped. And all the signs suggested that he was going to lose his job. And in a way, they probably inconvenienced him by visiting him on holiday and saying, actually, you're staying. Because I suspect he was braced for what felt like the inevitable, that he was going to lose his job as Manchester United's manager, given the season that they just had. And then not only do they keep him when they should have sacked him, they extend his contract, which runs with it the risk of a larger payoff, which, of course, was the case. Worse than that, they continue to recruit the way they recruited during Ten Hag's first 2 summers under the previous regime, which clearly the evidence showed did not work. Yet this was another summer where they signed 3 players born in the Netherlands out of 5. And okay, Mazraoui has been a good signing so far. And he was the cheapest signing as well, which again shows you that it's not about how much you spend. It is the quality. It's doing the due diligence and having the confidence. And sometimes it's the right man at the right time. And fortunately for Mazraoui, he's fitting like a glove. He's versatile. He's clearly technically a very good footballer. And in a bad Manchester United season, he is having a good season. But they signed a striker who does not score goals, really. It's 3 goals in 21 games. I know he got a couple of goals the other week and he's not started since, but it's still 3 goals in 21 games. It's a goal every 7 games. You can't be getting away with that as a striker in the Premier League, never mind at Man United. They signed a defender based on what he did 5 years ago rather than what he did in the past 5 years. Ugarte, clearly there was an issue there because Ten Hag wanted someone else, whether it was Amrabat, whether it was another midfielder. Ugarte was not his first choice pick. There was clearly an issue there. Lenny Yoro is a potential signing. There's no point even, we can't judge him at this point. It was unfortunate that he fractured his metatarsal in the summer. But the fact of the matter is the majority of their signings were born in the Netherlands. And I remember when I mentioned this to Ashworth and he said about Xerxes, you can't say just because he's Dutch. Well, you can, because look at the track record of Ten Hag signing Dutch players and then look at previous United managers. How often did they sign Dutch players? Solskjaer signed one who he didn't want, Donny van der Beek. I don't think Mourinho, I don't think he signed a Dutchman. Van Gaal was Dutch. There were a couple of Dutch players who came in. David Moyes didn't sign a Dutchman. So before Ten Hag came in, of the 9 years of previous United managers, how many players were signed that were Dutch? 3, I think. Is that so? Blind, Depay, Van der Beek, and 2 of them were by a Dutch manager. A Dutch manager comes in, and it's Malacia, Weghorst, it's Anthony from Ajax, it's Martinez from Ajax, it's Mason Mount, who played on loan in the Eredivisie, it's Andre Onana from Ajax, it's Sofian Amrabat, who was born in the Netherlands and played for Ten Hag at Utrecht. There is a common denominator there. It is the manager, and they continued to go in that direction, which was just foolhardy. It had to be a clean break this summer if they were going to keep Ten Hag with the recruitment. It wasn't. That has compounded matters, and that's why they're 13th in the Premier League table at the moment.
So if you break down Ineos's time running the football club, then Samuel extended Ten Hag's contract when, as we've just said, all the evidence said he needed to leave. Sacked a few months later, waited a long time to appoint Ashworth. His exit's now also going to cost money. They've hiked ticket prices, made mass redundancies, scaled back academy coverage, European away ticket collections have been scrapped. The women's team is beginning to be overlooked. Obviously, Ratcliffe discussed that in his interview with Andy Maitland, didn't he? And most importantly, they've overseen awful results. So they've talked a very good game, haven't they? And they promised a lot when they came into the football club earlier in the year. But it's been a really, really bad first impression, hasn't it, this year?
Barada told us in September they'd make mistakes, and he certainly wasn't kidding on that. But some of those mistakes are just entirely avoidable. And I've just gone through it with the manager. That was the biggest issue. And another issue there was that Ratcliffe underestimated the importance of the manager. He was saying, it's about the structure and blah, blah, blah. Look, however successful or unsuccessful you are in football, it is defined by the manager. The reason why United won a League Cup and an FA Cup was because of Ten Hag. The reason why they finished 8th last season and were in the bottom half of the table in late October was also because of Ten Hag. And there's a lot of accountability that comes with it, of course, with the players. But he had enormous sway in recruitment, and they spent more than £600 million on him during his time. And really, speaking to someone at the time that Ten Hag was sacked, they said that this is almost like the football administrator, and they said that this is like karma for Ineos because they have underestimated the sport. And you look at the results during their time, and I don't think anybody would dispute that whatsoever. They are not really experts in the field. I know they have, of course, owned previous clubs, and I think they hoped those were warm-up acts for taking on the headline of running Manchester United, and that's why they wanted best in class, left, right, and centre. And certainly at the start of the year, they were talking a good game. They had the coup of getting Barada from City. Ashworth was a very worthy pick as a sporting director. That just showed you the level of their ambition, but it's all of it. It's very, very quickly. It's not happened overnight, but it's just a number of things. It's obviously the job cuts, and I don't dispute that the staff at United was bloated. You'd see people on a pre-season tour that you'd never see again until the next pre-season tour, and it was the staff was well over 1,000, wasn't it? Okay, there were going to have to be people, if you want it to be a sustainable business, and if you want to challenge it, and if you want to balance the books in this era of PSR, you're going to have to get the ship in a better state than it was previously. But it has come at the cost of morale, and I don't think they've got the balance right with that whatsoever. And I didn't agree with what Ratcliffe said in his interview as well, that morale will be dictated by results. I don't think it is as black and white as that with staff, and he does strike me as far too detached for someone who, of course, we know the working class hero story of growing up in Valesworth, learning to count by counting the chimneys from his council estate. But this is someone whose office is a couple of goal frames away from the entrance to Harrods, who has a pub in Belgravia Square, is ferried around by a Mayfair chauffeur firm that some United players are using, which does raise the question whether that really tallies with the cost cutting that's going on at the club. And really, he's very detached from reality when he's talking about why should a ticket to Fulham cost more than a ticket to Man United? That's
sort
just
of touch, isn't he, Samuel?
That's
Yeah,
toned over.
touch.
Yeah, completely
It's
out of touch.
terrible.
That is someone. I mean, Sir Alex Ferguson infamously said in 2005 to some fans who collared him over the Glazers takeover. He said, "If you don't like it, go and watch Chelsea." And Ratcliffe did go and watch Chelsea. He had a season ticket at Chelsea, and he's been in that part of London for a very long time. He's obviously, kind of embedded in that circle, and now he's trying to he is bringing London prices to Trafford Park, and I'd say you can't do it, but he has done it, and the worst could be yet to come. Because if you go on Fulham's website and a ticket in their newsstand, the Riverside stand that backs onto the Thames, it can cost £80 or £85. So I fear that the worst could be yet to come regarding ticket prices at Old Trafford, particularly if they go with a new build stadium. We see it all the time. New build stadium, that means higher ticket prices as well, because you're in a different facility, and there's got to be a way of recouping money from it.
I think Tottenham have got the most expensive season tickets, don't they, in the Premier League, which just shows you they've got this lovely new stadium, but they've had to find a way to pay for it. Going back to Dan Ashworth, then, just end this part quickly, Samuel. In terms of the short term, I guess the expectation is Omar Barada and Jason Wilcox will kind of absorb his responsibilities. But is there anyone in your head who you think could replace him as a sporting director? Because we've said it before, and we said it when Ashworth was appointed. Well-run football clubs need sporting directors, don't they?
Well, given that Barada seems to be is in danger of cultivating the Ed Woodward culture of being surrounded by allies from Bristol University, and Barada is surrounded by allies from Manchester City, maybe he'll go for Cheeky Begiristain next summer.
I said that yesterday.
You never know. That would be amusing and quite the statement, and also an upgrade. But somehow I don't think it will happen. But I honestly have no idea. It's unclear whether United will hire a sporting director, but they need to be pretty transparent with supporters as to what lies ahead, because the January transfer window opens in a few weeks' time. Who exactly is leading recruitment now? Is it Jason Wilcox? You go back to that quote that Sofian Amrabat gave to the Daily Mail in October about how Ten Hag wants to keep him, but Jason Wilcox said no. So that would indicate that Wilcox has a hell of a lot of input into recruitment. Is he going to take over that permanently? Is that the right thing to do, given that this guy was overseeing recruitment at a championship club last season that are now sinking like a stone back to the championship from the Premier League? It's pretty.
It'd be very Glazer-esque,
dubious. It's certainly not best in class.
No,
Jason Wilcox is not a best in class choice for recruitment. Michael Edwards would have been, but obviously he went back to Liverpool. It's maybe Ashworth and Paul Mitchell can have a job swap. I think they'd probably be happier at different places right now.
The chaos has continued. We'll be back in a moment for part 2. Old Trafford as usual. It was just a big reminder of the challenge ahead for Ruben Amorim, wasn't it? I think we feel sorry for him considering how we've just discussed Ashworth's departure and the club is basically being destabilised, and he's got this just mammoth task really ahead, doesn't he? When you watch that performance on Saturday, look at some of the individual performances, some of the errors which we'll get onto, and the first goal as well, conceding from a set piece. It's so disappointing, isn't it?
It's amateur hour, and the game at Arsenal started with Diogo Dalot needlessly giving away a corner when he was caught in two minds, running for the ball with Martinelli, and he ended up just miscontrolling it. It went out for a corner. And I hate this in doubles tennis as well, when they lose a point and their reaction is high five. And what Dalot did after conceding the corner to the kings of the corners, the best team you've ever seen at corners, what does he do? There's Andre Onana, high five. And of course, from that corner, Partey should score, and he missed a sitter against Fulham. Yes, so it turns out he's clearly, although he's quite a imposing figure, he's not good at heading the ball, which was just well for United. But the game at Arsenal started with conceding a corner and the opponent nearly scoring. The same player concedes a corner, not quite as questionably against Nottingham Forest early on. What happens this time? The opponent scores from the corner. The mentality that Ten Hag repaired in the first season, it is absolutely broken. If a player is doing that, having conceded a corner, their instinct is to high five. It drives me up the wall. And I know it's a different generation thing with players, and it's all about, be positive in mind, because this self-help book said that you've got to have good vibes only and all this crap. You're not going to get anywhere doing that. Yeah, it's absolute bollocks. And as I said, it drives me up the wall just watching doubles tennis when players lose a point, goes and says, like, oh, high five, yeah. No. Have a bit of constructive criticism or give some pointers. That there is merit in that. The world hasn't changed that much. And Forest, the thing that's striking about watching United at Old Trafford now is that teams turn up and they are utterly unfazed. And I know it's been that for a while, but it is becoming a lot more striking when even someone as I think he really didn't help himself at all this season, and I think he's become somewhat unlikable in a way. But Steve Cooper, with all his chuntering on about referees, but after Leicester got walloped 5-2 at Old Trafford in the League Cup, he said how I didn't find it intimidating whatsoever. It was good to play out there, and it was a stupid quote because they still got battered, conceding 5 goals, losing by a 3-goal margin. But it did give an insight into how coaches view going to Old Trafford now. They're not remotely intimidated by it. I think last season there were a couple of games, and Liverpool certainly felt it, where the stadium does have this underdog aura, where United can get a result out of nothing, as they did against Liverpool, I'd say in both the FA Cup and the league games last season. Brentford at home being another one, Villa at home on Boxing Day being another one as well, where the behemoth that is Manchester United eventually, it stirs and it just rides roughshod over the opposition in however way they seek to do it. But we've not really seen that at all this season. And certainly at the weekend, although United made it 3-2 with way more than half an hour to play, I think with added time, it'd be about 36, 37 minutes. I never got the sense that they were going to equalise. I mean, I think it was Ty who said, oh, they could win this. And I disagreed with him. And it's strange times when you're saying after United have made it 3-2 and Nottingham Forest still leading, when you say that, Forest may regret not making it 4-1 here. And this is a team that had not won at Old Trafford in literally 30 years, who were only promoted back to the Premier League in 2022. And really, Nuno Espirito Santo has done a very good job there. I wasn't convinced by that he'd be a good fit at Forest, but he's made very good adjustments. I think they've benefited from the recruitment calming down. They've actually recruited some very good players. I mean, Gibbs White is a quality player. Chris Wood is the right man at the right time. They've got some very Quicksilver players behind the striker. I think Murillo's a really good centre-back. They sorted the goalkeeper out after having Matt Turner masquerading as a goalkeeper last season, and they've got the right balance about them. And there's a reason why they're having as good a season as they're having. And this is where United are at now. It's not an extreme statement to say that Nottingham Forest are in their slipstream. That's how far United have slipped.
I mean, let's talk about Andre Onana then. Pardon me, Samuel, it's time, isn't it? That shot, Morgan Gibbs-White, wouldn't have thought that was going to hit the back of the net. It did swerve a little bit. I almost thought he was a little bit complacent in the way he was trying to make the save. He didn't anticipate it well enough. And for that to go in, I mean, that was Andre Onana of last season in the Champions League, wasn't it? We talked about it a couple of podcasts back. I mean, for me, he's been the best player in that dressing room in this calendar year. And I said that because he's kind of eliminated these mistakes out of his game, and then he goes and does it again. It's so frustrating.
Well, that first goal was just inexplicable. It was like it was like watching a cricketer on the boundary who just misfielded the ball somehow. The only thing I can think of is that he thought that Gibbs-White, because he had such a big gap to shoot at goal, that he just instinctively thought, I'm going to have to dive here because he's going to go to one corner or the other. And in the end, Gibbs-White just hit it straight. I mean, it was nothing like, you talk about swerve, but it wasn't like even that Jabulani ball at the World Cup in 2010, I think it was a little bit overrated as to how much it moved. But it was just, it was the Onana of these first 6 months last season. And I mean, it summed his night up, that free kick United at the death when it was a foul inside United's half. He rolls the ball and the ball trickles over the halfway line, which is ridiculous. And then he took it was at the 5th or 6th attempt, he had the ball where it should be to take the free kick. And I didn't even play amateur football, but I know that if you've got a free kick, you take it in line where the linesman is. And he
do you think his mistake from earlier in the game sorry, Sam, he's come into his thought process there? Because that's sort of character, isn't it? That's such a bad decision. Do you think he's lost his head a little bit?
That's someone who is desperate to atone and claw the game back.
Yeah.
And I've spoken to him a few times. He is a really good character. He's a really nice guy. And I know that people hearing this think, oh, but doesn't mean he's a good footballer. But he has been good this season. He had a day to forget the weekend. And of course, we're dwelling on it now because we have to. It's a podcast, and that's fair enough. And we've showered him with praise this season, and now we've got to criticise him. Unfortunately for him, he is a good character, but he had an absolute. I mean, it was a brainstorm of a day. Even the winning goal, it's almost like that. 3 of them leave it for the other. I'm convinced that Onana.
I think Martinez is at fault.
I think he thinks
Do you think
I think Onana thinks no. I think Onana leaves it because he knows Martinez is there. And he thinks, well, he's going to clear this off the line. And in the end, Martinez probably thinks Onana's going to go for it. And by the time he reacts, it's almost as if he's already committed to Onana getting it, even the ball has gone past him. And it's like, oh, Jesus. It's just one of those moments where the player probably does not do that ever again in his career. But there are just times where your mind just shuts down. And you don't think clearly. And Martinez did not have a good game either.
But has he had a good season, Samuel? I think I'm going to do my lunch piece.
No, he hasn't.
He's just not the same player as he was in his first year. He's obviously had a few injuries. We've made the point where he's become quite rash in games, where he dives into quite a few challenges. His passing as well has actually dropped off a bit, and that's backed up by the stats. He's not kind of playing through the lines as he had. He's not really himself at the moment, and that was showed on Saturday night when he made that mistake. He was at fault for that goal for me. I can definitely see it for Onana as well, though. They both could have intervened.
I think for the image of Martinez, where he's an Argentinian centre-back and he's quite diminutive, you think he's going to be this really pugnacious and firebrand character, when actually he's, for the majority of his time at United, he's been pretty cool. He does put himself about. He is aggressive, but it's usually a controlled aggression when it's at its most effective. And he does keep his cool. You think back to the FA Cup final after Garnacho scored and he was celebrating and chiding the City fans. The one who was trying to calm him down and keep him in check was Martinez. And normally it would be the South American players who would be the most febrile in that setting. And of course, Garnacho was, but Martinez was the opposite. And that is partly why he had such a good first season at United. There was that controlled aggression where he would be able to read the game and he wouldn't be diving in. But this season, he has looked a very, very different centre back. As you say, he is far too rash. He is too impetuous. His distribution has deserted him quite a lot of the
And that
time.
was one of his biggest strengths, wasn't it? His passing was brilliant.
Yeah. He was a huge asset to attacks in that first season. But he's what, 2.5 years in now at United, and you cannot be dining off your first season and your second season, never mind your third season. And the more you watch him, the more you think, come next summer when they will have to sign 2 centre backs. I'm not being extreme here. They could easily release 3 centre backs in the summer, but I think realistically it will be 2 who go. The Maguire situation, there could be a bit of a Varane or a De Gea there, because do they really want to extend his contract by a year with the salary that he's on, as injury prone as he's been, having not with him not being a regular starter as well. It's going to be interesting to see how that plays out. But they will need 2 centre backs next year. And you look at De Ligt and you look at Martinez, and you would not necessarily be certain of those 2 starting next season, when hopefully, for Amrim's sake and United's sake, they have got a squad that is far more in his image and the image of this new team and this new club, rather than the one that he's inherited, that is obviously, it was built up by Ten Hag.
And when we talk about Martinez like that, I just think of Dalot as well. I think it's kind of very the same at the moment. They're both struggling for form. And we'll come on to the Europa League. Obviously, that's on Thursday, Samuel, an opportunity to bounce back after 2 defeats. I'd definitely give them a rest. I think they're just screaming for a game out, really. Dalot in particular, he just looks quite lethargic at the moment. There was a moment at the end of the game where he hit it into the Stretford end, wasn't he? Almost by, or was it the scoreboard end? And he blared it into the stands regardless, yeah. But so would you agree with that assessment that both of those players could probably do for game out?
Do you say Martinez and Dalot or De Ligt?
Yeah, for me, they're really looking like they could do for rest for me.
Well, certainly he's going to rotate on Thursday, because they've got the derby on Sunday. And I think the other thing that has probably been overlooked a little bit, apart from, I think there was an account that kind of just lampooned his defending for Timber's goal, even though it wasn't in his area. But United are worse at defending corners without Maguire, which United have got to factor into their games this week, because teams are going to be redoubling their efforts when it comes to corner practice ahead of playing against United. Forest could have scored from a couple of other set pieces after going 1-0 up on Saturday. And at the moment, the way United are playing, back-to-back defeats in the Premier League, there are not too many players, if any players in that team, who've got to be assured of starting in the next Premier League game. I mean, Amorim has been keeping them on their toes, making as many changes as he has. What is it? Something like 23 changes now, I think it might be, across these matches. So that will probably continue, because it is the Europa League in midweek, and I know Pilsen are not. It would be remiss to underestimate a side who've not done too badly at all whatsoever in their own Europa League campaign. But the bigger picture this week is the derby. The derby is the bigger game. Nobody's going to dispute that. And he's got to. I mean, I thought the team at the weekend was actually more. He'd said on Friday or Thursday, whenever the press conference was, that he was more or less close to settling on his best 11. And I thought that team at the weekend was more or less close to the best 11. I think at the moment you'd have Mazraoui in there some way or other for Dalot, even though Mazraoui is not. I don't think he's been playing on the left wing in this 3-4-3. But then for them to perform the way they did, that does raise questions all of a sudden as to what the team on Sunday is going to be like. Because I thought at the weekend that the majority of starters who were going to be picked against Forest, he should have in mind as starting against City 8 days later, which is a completely logical way of thinking. But when you get beaten the way United did at the weekend, there were going to have to be some adjustments there. And certainly as centre back, I would not be. You can't say that Martinez or De Ligt, their positions are safeguarded whatsoever. And Maguire did demonstrate earlier in the season when he came on against Porto, getting the goal, and then he started at the weekend against Villa, coming in with Evans as De Ligt and Martinez were dropped. And of course, that was under Ten Hag. So that goes to show that it doesn't matter who the manager is; they've got to exercise some ruthlessness from time to time. And Amorim has been ruthless. I think his rotation has been flawed. The results bear that out. It's not worked entirely, and two players get 2 goals and then they don't start in either of the next 2 games. I think that there is some flawed thinking there, not necessarily in relation to Xerxes, who I don't think was ever going to start against Arsenal, but Rashford, certainly, it was a surprise. And speaking to someone at United, they said that he's looking at players who's right for this game, who's right for that game. And at some point or another, some players are going to turn their nose up at that way of at that selection policy. And I'm not saying that Amorim should have any time for that, or he should indulge players whatsoever, because these players are mid-table players, as they're shown at the moment. United are 13th in the Premier League, but it's a pretty wretched time for them if they do lose at City on Sunday, and it's a pretty bonkers derby given City's run of form, but City will still be favourites for that at the Etihad. And if United do lose that, that's the first time they've lost 3 successive Premier League matches since December 2015. And gallingly for Amorim, they will have all come under him.
Oh, we're forgetting Harry Maguire a little bit, Samuel, because before he picked up that injury, I mean, he was having a really good time of things. He was, I said multiple times, if you're in the trenches, really, you want Harry Maguire alongside you. And when the chips are down, he's the kind of player who will deliver. And he has experience playing in the back three. He has good form. He's done well since coming on and making a few substitute appearances. Has he not got a big role to play in the next few weeks? And when we think about these set pieces as well, Maguire comes straight into my head because, I mean, we all heard Phil Jones talking about it, and he says sometimes it's just desire and getting on the end of a ball. And when you're defending set pieces, Harry Maguire has that in abundance for me.
Well, he'll start at least one game this week, you would think, injury permitting. And football is not complicated. If you're conceding goals from a set piece, and despite a set piece coach coming out into the technical area and positioning players, despite practicing them in the warm up before kickoff, you've got to look harder at the problem. And I don't think you have to look that hard. Ultimately, United, without Maguire off the pitch, they have become worse at defending set pieces and corners. And if you put someone quite tall on, then maybe you've got the percentage increase of you heading that ball away is just going to increase. You've got a better chance of defending it. And Maguire, obviously, as I said, I thought they became worse at defending from the corners at Arsenal after Maguire went off. And I felt sorry for Amorim there, because clearly Maguire was always going to play an hour where he'd just come back from injury. But when you're forced into that change where you're 1-0 down, having conceded from a corner, and then you concede from another corner, and you nearly concede from God knows how many other corners, having taken that player off the pitch, it is not a good look. And the amount of times Amorim has said X player was tired, Y player was tired, Z player was tired. I mean, these are meant to be athletes, professional footballers. But it feels like we just keep on hearing how tired these players are, even though this is a club that has been accustomed to playing 3 games in 7 or 8 days for 20, God knows how many years, 30 years even maybe. And I know the pace increases every year, but ultimately these players are nowhere near fit enough. And this keeps on happening. A new Manchester United manager comes in and he discovers that the players aren't fit enough. Which is a major issue. I mean, Amorim said on Friday that they've got to run like mad dogs. And immediately I thought, well, Mourinho said something about mad dogs pretty much 6 years ago. And I looked up the quote and he said, we don't have many mad dogs. that was 6 years ago. And that's how that the amount of times United have come full circle, I've lost count of, and this was another one.
More mad dogs needed. Hopefully, some more mad dogs in the summer. Thanks for your time, Samuel.
Thank you very much, Stephen.
And thanks, listeners, as usual. We'll be back later in the week to reflect on the Europa League performance away in the Czech Republic. I hope Samuel's got his coat for that one. It's going to be a bit chilly, and to look ahead to the Manchester derby. Take care.